I am Arijit Ghosh and we are at Learning for a Sustainable Future Teacher Conference in New Delhi. I am in conversation with Anitha Bijesh from Delhi Public School, Bangalore South and Bhuvana Barshikar from Kids Kingdom Public School, Nanded. Welcome.
Thank you.
Both of you have presented papers at this year's teacher conference and for embedding core skills within the curriculum. If I may ask, Anitha, you first, what are your interventions in the classroom? If you can share it with us.
My entire presentation was on innovative strategies in effective English language learning. So what I did was I underwent the course, of course, on core skills, and I tried embedding critical thinking into my lesson design. So what I did was I brought in a lot of techniques wherein I got children to think. So for introducing a poem, in fact for teaching a poem, I used a comic strip. There were other methodologies where what I did was I gave them anticipatory guides, or I would give them a crumpled question. There were some things which got them thinking to a great extent, and I was in fact very happy to see that we moved beyond boundaries, we moved beyond the textbook. So in a nutshell, what I would like to say is that yes, it is easy to embed core skills if you have a proper effective lesson design.
Thank you. Sounds really exciting, teaching English with comic strips. What about your intervention, Bhuvana?
Actually, as she said, as Anitha said, it all started with a training program with British Council. Like we went through the 2 stages of the training program of core skills, and then we started implementing that, embedding critical thinking and problem solving into our teaching learning process. And the case study which I had done was like developing responsible citizens, like empathizing them and sensitizing them towards the challenges faced by the old age people, because that was a part of my English lesson. And I felt like this was one of the ways I could make them more responsible and responsive. What I felt, what was my experience with embedding core skills was, each student in my class could contribute his bit to making the teaching learning process more happier, more easier. And at the end of the day, my students became more responsible, they became more responsive, and they really understood the challenges faced by the old people. And they have understood like what kind of behavior they should exhibit towards their parents when they grow up, and how they would feel if they are not fulfilling their responsibilities as a grown-up citizen. And that was my particular aim. I wanted to make them more responsible citizens and more productive citizens of the society. And I think to some extent I have achieved it, because we could notice a change in behavior in the students. And this change was noticed by all the teachers, like a positive change, which we all wanted to happen for a long period of time. And this is happening gradually. So that's the best part I could say.
Great to hear that. What has been the change in the reaction of parents? How did the parents react to this change?
Parents, initially, they were very apprehensive because they were absolutely unaware of this flipped classroom technology, like methodology which I had used. And they felt that students teaching, then how would they learn? Will the learning really happen? And how much time would be spent? Because the class I'm dealing was with class 10th. And class 10th, we all know, is how crucial for the parents as well as the students. So they said that, at this stage, implementing something new, I don't know how it is going to happen. But after that, they really realized that, yes, they are doing their part. No doubt they're spending a little bit more time than expected, but still they're doing it. So I could finish most of my 50% of my lessons with this flipped classroom, and children are really enjoying it.
Fantastic. Anitha, if you can share with us that what has been the biggest challenge what you faced while embedding core skills within the curriculum?
Well, I think, see, when you talk about core skills, the entire focus is on skill development. It is, of course, learning and transversal competence. The challenge that I had was, about getting children to be thinking ready. So initially it took me a little time to get them to think in the way I wanted to. The activities are there, but when you talk about effective implementation, there is some kind of a training that they require. You know, they're not ready because we've always been having the same kind of system. So I think the biggest challenge for me was that, for getting my children to think on par with what I actually wanted them to do. But then, you know, a few rounds and it was fine. We had this wonderful activity, like I was talking to the other teachers, when I was trying to teach them the daffodils. What I did was I pulled out nouns and verbs from the poem, and I told them that today you're going to write a poetry of your own, a poem of your own, an octet. And you know how it is when you talk about English poetry, they're not ready at all. So I did have a lot of you know, apprehension. But at the end of it all of them came out with lovely poems. And you know, it took me a little time to get them, to convince them about how they could think differently. So I think, you know, because we've always been thinking about clones and we've always got instructions, I realized that, you know, getting my students to understand that I'm going to stop conveying information as a teacher. Now they have to think of information as a process. That was the challenging part.
Fantastic. It's all about handling non-routine problems.
Yes.
Apart from your paper presentation, you have been participating in other sessions in this 2 days of teacher conference. What is your biggest takeaway from this conference?
I think this present session that I had about the Lengo app, you know, we talk about assessment of core skills, which is a really difficult task. But going through what Mr. Baldev was talking about, I think that is the right way, and that would actually give us also impetus and an idea as to what we could do in terms of assessing core skills. So I think that is the best takeaway.
Fantastic. What about you, Bhuvana?
I agree with her. The Lengo app was really an eye-opener for all of us. And surely we are going to implement it once we go back, and we are going to study and you know, research more about it, like how the app is really going to help us in our day-to-day teaching and teaching-learning process. And the second thing which I liked the best was like what the teachers who were sitting at my table, we discussed was the partnership. Yesterday we had a small meeting with the UK partner schools which they had introduced, and then we happened to meet one of the teachers from the UK school, and I really got to know like how to sustain your partnership, you know, for a longer period of time, and which is going to be really helpful and useful for both the schools in return. And secondly, we also developed an idea like we can have a teacher exchange and a student exchange program within our country itself. That also could be, you know, really helpful in our context. Like we would actually know what is happening in the other state, and our children would also be happy to know that being in Nanded, I'm at par with my friend at Hyderabad or at Jamshedpur or at Ranchi. No doubt, being at par with UK is very important. But even if I'm at par with my country mates, that also will boost up their confidence. That's what I feel.
Thank you. We were in conversation with Anitha Bijesh and Bhuvana Barshikar.